My name is Ed Martinez, and this is the sound of my voice.
This is my voice. I'm Mikey Rotella. I do special makeup effects, and I got a cool opportunity to work on the new Hellraiser movie. So that's what we're here to talk about. I'm pretty excited. I'm from New Jersey. I'm from North Jersey originally, and grew up, the same as everybody else, basically that gets into this stuff. Just being a fan of Monster Masks and Fangoria and Gore Zone, and being obsessed with monster movies in the VHS days. Since I can remember, I've wanted to be an effects artist because I saw the making of Thriller, and that sort of changed my life. I didn't know that these things weren't real, and then seeing Rick Baker and John Landis and all that stuff from behind the scenes of that kind of blew my mind. I remember they played it on MTV all the time, and I was like an event at my house. And I knew from then on, I don't know how to do that. I don't know where to do it. I don't know anything about it, but I'm going to be one of those guys that makes those little rubber things that glue to people's faces. I made a lot of stuff in high school as a kid and just messed around a lot. And I had pretty supportive parents, so that was pretty great. So I went to the Art Institute of Philadelphia. I got a bachelor's degree in arts and sciences with applications for industrial design. All I wanted to do was make rubber monsters. And then after that, I went to makeup school. I went out to Pittsburgh to Savini School. I got to meet Dick Smith for the first time, and I got to jump into his Dick Smith workshop, which they offered at Savini, which is one of the reasons why I went. After that, that was it. I was like, all right, well, now I got to head out to LA and just, roll the dice and see what happens. Actually, one of the first opportunities I got was when I was 15. I got to work on the movie Dogma, Kevin Smith's Dogma, with Vinny Gostini. So that was pretty awesome. That was like my first real opportunity to like actually see how stuff goes in a shop and work with real shop professionals and people like that. And
I had seen you on TV, on the Distortion show. How did that come about?
I was working for Jordu at the time. He really introduced me to distortions and that whole world. I mean, I was a huge fan of those masks since I was going back, but I remember they were in the back of the Fangorias, so I was not completely aware of distortions and Ed Edmonds until Jordu was really like, no, this is the guy. Like, this is the guy that was doing all this stuff. You want to go out there, you want to go work for Ed, because he's looking for some people. I don't think he realized that, what it would turn into. And we do like a couple pieces a week. It was insane. It was just like sculpting boot camp, and I was learning so much because I'm with Ed, I'm with Jordu, and it was amazing. When I was already working for Distortions before the show, Ed said to me, he's like, "Hey, you want to be on TV?" And I was like, not really. I mean, I just want to sculpt monsters, I don't. He's like, oh, let me put it this way. We're going to have a TV show. So if you want to work here, to be on it. And I was like, I guess I'm going to be on TV then. Oh, yeah, it's so great. And every time you're in a situation like that where everyone is like a legit family and everyone's a character in their own right, you're like, and everyone says it like, oh, this deserves a TV show. And then here it comes and it actually happens. I thought it was just done so well. I basically called myself like a jobber. You know what I mean? I would just jump from gig to gig, shop to shop. I've luckily worked with most shops out here, with only a few exceptions. And I was just really lucky, like one thing after the other. I think the first gig I had was with Rick Lazzarini, the character shop, and meeting Rick was wild because I knew him. I remember having those VHSs. I bought them like out of the back of Fangoria, and I just remember Lazzarini and like all these different people, Steve Wang and Brian Wade, and like then being out there and getting to work with some of these people was kind of blowing my mind. For him though, I was just working on these like commercials. We had the Foster Farms chicken commercials, right? They had to make these puppets. And the biggest thing I did with him though was we made some stuff for Pushing Daisies, which was like this short-lived kind of fantasy. It was so cool. It was such a cool little series. But then at Mungles, it was a lot of TV as well. It was House MD and CSI. We had tons of corpses. It was cool because, it was a lot of young people that were coming in to Mungles. He'd give us all a shot. We did mostly shop work, but every once in a while, they'd have to send us on set with these bodies to like wrangle these dead bodies at like Warner Brothers or Universal or something like that. And this is like, you're freaking out because you just got out here and you're like, wow, this is an actual movie set. Like, I worked once at Universal in the back lot, and I was thinking about when I was a kid, my family used to come out to LA and we'd go to Universal and we'd take the tour of the back lot, and I'd see all the people working. and I'd like wave at him as a little kid, you know, and you know, nobody would wave back or whatever. I'm like, whatever, you know. But now I'm in the back lot, and I'm standing there with a bunch of these like hard-nosed Teamsters and grips and stuff like that. And here comes the tram, and I'm watching them, and I'm like waving at the tram, and they're all like shaking their heads, looking at me like, bro, are you really going to be that guy? And I'm like, of course I am. This is a big deal for me. Around that time, I was really wanting to focus on sculpture. Like that was my favorite thing, and I felt like it was a really kind of creative part of the process that I really wanted to be involved with. Jordu, it sort of instilled that as well. He's like, look, this is the whole process. You know, I wound up taking his class, so he taught that. He's like, you're doing everything. You're doing, you know, design, you're doing sculpture, you're doing mold making, you're doing casting, seaming, painting, you know, everything. Finishing. Yeah, so it's the entire process. At the same time, I was jumping around on different shows and going to different shops. I worked again for Gostini. I worked for ADI for a really long time. But
now Gostini was in LA?
Yeah, Gostini came out to LA in between that time. And so now here I was out in LA, and it was the last time I saw him, I was like 15 years old, and he was like freaking out. It's like he's like my uncle or something. But ADI was a place where I really got to kind of grow, because I got into ADI and I was literally filing designs that other designers were doing in the computers in the design room. Then I moved to the mech shop, and I was like milling out little pieces and stuff for all the mechanics and all the guys doing all the cool animatronics. Then I moved to the mold shop. Basically, I moved through every department at ADI, and then I landed in the mold shop. Steve Frakes, who's a legend himself, and here he was teaching me how to make molds like on a professional level. But I just went home every night and I sculpted. I would always bounce back to Jordu's, and he'd be able to give me, you know, something to do here or there. So ADI was like, all right, well, come over here because we're doing some of the big stuff over here. And Jordu's like, I can't. I got too much stuff going on over here. I got my own shop. He's like, why don't you take Mikey? He can sculpt. And they're like, Mikey, the guy was just here making molds. He's not a... And they let me do it. And that was my first legitimate like hire as a sculptor, like in the sculpting department. And I was like freaking out. Like, this is like the greatest opportunity ever. You know, I get to work on something that's related to, you know, John Carpenter's The Thing, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. And I learned so much. And from that point on, I could say, like, look, I'm a sculptor. Yeah. And I honestly, like, I'm so grateful for everybody that, you know, that's helped on the way. And I just have a blast. Well, I've been at K&B for almost like going on 4 years straight, which is absolutely insane. They just never let me go. And I was like, whoa, this is nuts. And I like kind of sat down with them like, hey, you know, what's up? You know, when do I have to worry about getting laid off? And they're like, look, it's a little different here. We crank so hard on stuff that we don't let people in and out as much as everyone else. So, you know, if you want to stay, you stay. You know? The first thing when I jumped in, I think immediately they just throw Walking Dead stuff at you because they just have so much, you know, and it's sort of like trial by fire. So they're like, boom, zombie, you know, here you go. We got this cool gig called Jupiter's Legacy, which was sort of an off-brand comic for Netflix. They were doing like an adaptation of that, like a series. We got to work on some awesome stuff, really cool. This character called Black Star, who is sort of like like Apocalypse or Dark Side type of a bad guy. You know, my main job was, you know, spoiler alert for everybody, but this character, he gets killed, you know, and he's like laid out on this slab, and they're studying his dead body after the fact, and he's this like alien superhuman thing. What happened? It was just weird because he's supposed to be laying on the slab, you know, but I couldn't, you know, lay down a body form and just start sculpting on top of it because nothing would, the symmetry and everything wouldn't make any sense. And, you know, the musculature and stuff and anatomy would be off and weird because it would all be from a weird vantage point. I would have to get up on a ladder to look down on this thing and make sure it was symmetrical. You know, it didn't make sense. So I sculpted it upright first, and I got all the forms there and all the muscles there, and I balanced it out real rough. And then I started to sculpt as if there was some, you know, gravity and weight to everything, like it was laying flat. That's when I got it to a certain point, laid the whole thing flat and finished it in that way. They had a really nice body form of Kerry Jones, who's a supervisor at K&B, and he's also one of their go-to guys for creature suit stuff because he's 6'8", and he's real muscular and stuff, and so he really would have been perfect, for this role. But they had Tyler Mane playing the character, and he is the guy who played Sabretooth in the X-Men movies and stuff. And he's like, I don't know if it's 6'10" or something like that, and maybe like 350 pounds, like solid, muscle. So we had to actually add on top of Carrie's body to kind of build out this character. And at the time, we didn't have life casts of him yet. I didn't really even know how big he was. The makeup was already done. Dave Grasso sculpted a beautiful makeup on Tyler Mane's life cast. So I knew the look of things, and Dave also did a bunch of stuff on ZBrush, so I knew what it was supposed to sort of look like. It was crazy trying to move it around, and we had like 6 guys moving this sculpture around because it was on this big, nice, sturdy, wooden table. And then I could just really go off the weight of everything. Like even stuff started to move and crack and kind of like settle on the table. But that was good because that's where that's where I needed it to land, So I was just fixing all the stuff and finishing up the hands and feet and head. And it was nuts. Mike Ross is the mold shop supervisor over there, and he's got Steve Frakes, a blast from my past, in his kind of arsenal of badasses in the mold shop. I mean, they have a pretty serious crew of mold makers over there, and they all just jump on it. And that's what's so cool with something that big. You got like 6, 7 guys jumping on one thing and molding it, and they were able to crank out that mold in like less than 2 days. I think it was insane. I'm just always blown away by that process. I think mold making is the most important process in the whole thing, just because it doesn't matter how good a sculpture is if you don't have a good mold. I mean, what are you going to make with it? Some of the people on Hellraiser were on that Black Star body as well. Chris Bear, Andy Chavez, I think Roger Baena. They molded a lot of stuff on Hellraiser as well, but they were also at K&B. You know how these are like, it's a small community of people. So you cross paths all the time, and like it's awesome because when you see people that you've worked with before, you're like, oh, all right, this is gonna be great, So I was just jamming at K&B. Every once in a while, something will come up, a moonlighting opportunity on something else. I'm such a nerd about stuff. Sometimes I just have to jump on stuff, like even if I know it's going to run me into the ground and basically kill me, because I don't have any time to rest and recoup from any of these things. Hellraiser was exactly that. When Josh hit me up, and I knew Josh and Sierra from over at ADI, we were all working together, and they were fairly new, and I didn't really know them. They weren't even together yet. Like, and they wound up getting married, starting their own company and all this stuff. And I was hearing all this stuff about them. I'm like, man, that's crazy. These guys are just jamming. I was like so proud because I saw them when they were just sort of coming in, and I was sort of at the same time, still a new guy. So it's kind of, I love those success stories too. So that's pretty sweet. Yeah, they were on the thing, and they might have been on a couple other things before that too. I know they worked on Dave Elsey's Wolves, which they did at ADI. I'm pretty sure they were around at that time as well. It's just so much was cranking through ADI at the time. I think they had up to like 6 or 7 projects at a time there. So we'd all be working together, but we weren't always working on the same stuff. So it's kind of interesting. I remember when The Ritual happened, I was so excited about that movie. That was like the moment for me where I knew that their company was like exploding, and I was pumped. Me and my wife are obsessed with horror movies, and we'll just try to we'll give stuff a chance. We'll go throw something on, see what it is. The Ritual kind of blew our minds. We're like, man, a new horror movie that's actually awesome. And then I'm always watching the credits just to see if anyone I know is involved, and there's Josh and Sierra, and I was like, no way, that's awesome. So then getting that random call from Josh about Hellraiser, I didn't even hesitate. Like he said, hey man, we're gonna, I'm just gonna tell you what it is. Obviously you can't talk about it, but it's the new Hellraiser. And I just like blurted out, like, well, can I do the Chatterer? And he was like, yep. And I was like, I'm in. Like, it was like, that was it. That was our whole like meeting basically was, I just want to do the Chatterer. If you're down, I'm down. And it totally worked out. And I just knew everything else, we would just make it happen because I could not let something like that pass, So I just jumped on it. He's my favorite character. And I mean, I love the original Hellraiser, and I love all the Cenobites and everything they did, but Chatterer always scared the hell out of me. And I have this like obsession with teeth. Like I just love teeth, and I just think they're scary and weird. And they're also like a really hard thing to sculpt just because there's so much surface area to cover and so many like small shapes to put together. And my friend Ryan Cook, we worked together. We went to school together, and we kind of came out at the same time. We were working on a lot of stuff. And he was always obsessed with dentures and making teeth. And he made the most amazing like veneers and dentures and stuff for effects teeth. And I sat down with him once. I'm like, look, man, I think teeth are really important. I want my mask to have like really weird teeth and really like stuff that is believable, even though it's over the top. And he basically broke down tooth anatomy for me right there. And he had been studying it almost like a dentist for years. And I was like, oh, I think I get this. And I just kept working on it, trying to get better. Made so much sense for Chatterer. Like I can't wait to take a crack at that, you know. What happened next was I had to go check out their space. I had never been over to see Russell Effects space, and you know everyone like has their own shop. Oh, come check out my shop, and you're like, all right, it's a garage or it's a small little space. I go to their place, and it's the most awesome shop I've ever been in. I mean, it's a small do-it-yourself, old school 80s style effects shop, but it's massive. Wow. It's almost like twice the size of any like small shop that I've been in, because they have like kind of an industrial space plus this engine company room for an old school fire truck or something. And it creates this kind of cool L around their property where you almost have two different shops. They just had stuff everywhere, all the stuff they had been doing for the last few years that I wasn't aware of. And I was like walking around like a museum, and sure enough, right on the wall there is a full-size version of the monster from the Ritual. And I was like, man, this is so cool. Like I'm so excited about this. So Josh immediately kind of, throws me in, and he's like, look, this is what we're planning. This is what we're doing. Check this out. Check this out. They had done a really cool bust of Pinhead, which is like a sort of a test. Seeing that was like, I totally get what's going on. And this is awesome because I'm nervous as a fan. I can't stand remakes. I'm just not into it, And I'm like, look, I'm going to do this just so I can be a part of the Hellraiser legacy in some way or another, but I'm always skeptical, even though I love David Bruckner's work, excited about it. At the same time, I was really skeptical. I wasn't sure, right? So when I saw that, I was like, okay, this is going to be awesome because these are cool ideas and cool designs. And when I saw, Keith's designs, I was freaking out because I was like, yeah, I totally get this. I understand what they're trying to do. It's going to be sick. Who knows what the movie's going to turn out like, but I know at least these are going to be awesome. Yeah, Keith Thompson. I mean, that guy is unbelievable. And his designs, they were like if someone could take Clive Barker's work and then flesh it out to a more kind of finished, realistic place. But it still hit all those notes that Clive's art hits. Just seeing Pinhead and the drawing he did of the character, the way the head was shaped and everything, it reminded me of all the old paintings that I had seen of, the Hell Priest before even the first movie. Man, he's totally nailed it. And this idea, what they're wearing, their sort of S&M gear being part of them as if their skins flayed open and revealing their muscles underneath. It was a wink to Hellraiser 2. It was a wink in ways to Julia and Frank in their just like skinless forms. And that kind of underground, like kind of sexy, gross torture porn thing that the Cenobites had at the same time. I'm always fascinated when you take something that's established and iconic and you do something different with it, but it's actually interesting because I don't want to see anything change because I'm such a nerd and I'm such a fan. I'm like, no, you can't change that. You can't change this. But if you can do something fresh with it and it's actually interesting, that always blows my mind. And just seeing those sketches, I knew, okay, they're on the right track because they're doing something cool. It's different, but it's still iconic and it's still the same look from that same world. And that to me was like a home run, I walk into the shop and I'm like kind of marveling at all the stuff that's like laying around, and they're full on like jamming on stuff already. So I was like overwhelmed. So the bus was the first thing I saw, and that was already cool. But I didn't really understand what they were trying to do until I saw Keith Thompson's artwork. And I saw the Pinhead first. I understand what they're going for here, and I was 100% in. And then they showed me the Chatterer stuff. And that's when I was like, that kind of flipped my lid because I'm like, okay, now this is like next level. Keith's ideas works into the Chatterer character, which, like I said, is my favorite. And I was like, this is awesome. I can't wait. Like, I couldn't wait to start throwing clay at this thing, you know? They had one that was his whole body. Then they had a back that was the whole backside of his body. And it's so intricate. I mean, there's so much going on. I had to really like study what was going on to even make any sense of it. And some of it didn't make sense, which I thought was really cool, because I'm like, look, this is fantasy. We can do whatever we want with this. I love that this doesn't make sense and that doesn't make sense. And I'm totally into it. Even stuff that I would learn later that was worked out kind of under the skin, like there might be things moving and doing things, and there was reason for some stuff. At first glance, I didn't know what any of that was, so I just was like, look, this is cool, and I'm down. But they had a couple different versions of Chatterer's face and head. Some of them were more extreme, and some of them were a little more subdued, but they all had similar things going on that was their version of the Chatterer, where it went further away from like the Bob Keane, Nigel Booth one, which is one of my favorite creatures on the planet. Again, just like Pinhead, it was different enough, but it wasn't so far away that it was offensive in any way. If anything, I was like excited about it. This is great. I want to see something different. I want to just see the same thing. It has to be respectful, and it has to be on point with that original stuff. And I thought that it was.
Everybody keeps talking about the way around the shoulders, that it kind of looks like a mother mold.
Yeah, I love that. And they all had that. Most of the heads they like ended at that point, right? And it kind of created this cool bust in the shapes that were just on the paper that I'm looking at, the designs. And then they had the full body one that I could see what happened underneath that. And that didn't really change much conceptually from that artwork. I think everybody that understands anything about effects or how any of this stuff works, they immediately see that bust shape and they think mother mold. I didn't know why had that shape or that was like kind of echoing that. I didn't know if it was purposeful or what it was, but I was like, that is just cool. And it looks practical. It looks like utilitarian, as to like he's fastening parts of his skin together with these kind of sutures and rivets and things like that are kind of coming together to look like it makes sense how he's assembled in some way. And that's another thing that's really interesting about the different layers, like of the skin, and then the sinew and muscle and bone underneath, and then the hollow, that kind of those open spaces in the middle. That stuff translates in the art. Just aesthetically, art-wise, the idea of like areas of rest and relaxation in the design, and then real heavy detail and more visceral kind of just that stuff contrasted next to each other is so interesting. And that's what the original Cenobites were, right? These smooth white faces and this black from the neck down, these black, like tortured S&M gear. And color-wise, those little flecks and specks of red that you're seeing of their torn flesh and their like fresh wounds, it really contrasts against the black and the white pale skin. And they took that to a whole nother level with this new stuff, because now you don't have any of that black sort of interrupting. You just have this kind of smooth, almost translucent, really creepy skin, and then right next to it, these really hard, kind of visceral, bloody, dark, deep lines and stuff. And it's just really interesting. And Chatterer is a perfect example of that, because like that smooth kind of egg-shaped head, then this like explosion of red and teeth and skin all pulled, on his face. And then this relaxation of almost like this long, thin neck, very sculptural. And then all of a sudden there's this dividing line. And then from there down, just like melee, bloody, crazy sinews pulled in every direction and things. And I thought, again, here's a thing that's very different from the original, but it makes so much sense, right? Why is the box the only weird, techie? It all has that toy maker music box, wind up clockwork, which puts it into that sort of Victorian setting that the toy maker is supposed to be from, and I like that. To take that and apply it into the torture of each character, it's sort of there in some way. They're each like tortured in different ways. The motor of all of their means of torture be box-like. It's so cool. And then it makes sense. Like, then it's like, okay, well, maybe if this skin's pulling in this direction, this is what it would look like, And
the idea that, never thought of this, but the thing in the back of his head is making his teeth chatter.
Yeah, you know, I never thought about that until I heard Keith say that in your interview, and I thought that was pretty neat as well. You know, what's funny is we did an early test sculpture, really. It was almost like another like maquette style bust. You know, it was full size. It's kind of important for creature effects and makeup effects to get the actors cast and then literally cast like in alginate so we can start actually producing these pieces. But if it's still a list of people's names, there's nothing we can do, right? So Josh was like, look, just jump in, start throwing some clay around, and we'll see. We can at least get a cool idea of what this thing looks like in 3 dimensions, and we can keep moving, even though we're kind of at a standstill with casting and stuff. There was one design in particular that Keith Thompson did that was real, almost animalistic and just more extreme. And it seems like the skin on his face was pulled even more tight, and there was more reveal to the whole palate, to the teeth, like gums sort of stretching back, and it was wild. Like it had almost like a horse-like, goat-like vibe to the teeth instead of the more human stuff that we landed on. And so I immediately responded well to that because I like over the top. I want to go even more monstery and more crazy. I'm not into subtlety at all, really, right? The other thing that was interesting is there is a, sometimes not so subtle sexual element to all the Cenobites and all these characters. In Keith's art, there was sort of like an orifice, for lack of a better term, in the forehead of Chatterer character. To me, I was like, look, let's not beat around the bush here with all these shapes. Like, let's just go for it. And I did a not so subtle orifice in my sculpture, So that was one of the things also. So the neck was a little longer. The teeth were more kind of horse-like and pronounced and very monstrous. And there was, of course, this orifice, just bullseye right in the front of the forehead. But I knew that it was like, all right, they're going to have to really want to go hard if they approve this. But at least they get to walk around it, move around it, look at it, and see what it is. And I was able to work out real basic shapes of the Leviathan tech in the back of the head. That was all in the design, and I just sort of did a quick mock-up in clay of that too. And I even etched in some of the kind of hieroglyphic sort of shapes and stuff like that I thought were neat. I took 2 paintbrushes and I cut the handles off, and I put them up, into this thing as almost like these kind of rudimentary kind of spools that were collecting the skin of Chatterer's lips, So like, the box did its whirring or moving or whatever it did, and it spun these spools, which kind of kept cranking the skin of his face back further and further. That was all worked out, that original sculpture. I painted the paintbrushes that clay color. The funny part was David Bruckner came in to look at it, and I was like starstruck because I'm excited. Like I said, I was a fan of his movies already. Here's this young, kind of cool guy. And I'm like, man, this is crazy. This is like the future of horror right here. You know what I mean? And here he is. And he was responding so well to everything everybody was doing. And he looked at the Chatterer sculpture and he liked it. And he was like excited. And I was like on cloud 9. So they left and I'm like, I can't believe this is so awesome. Like they actually like it. And I guess at some point between then and the next day, they called Josh. They're like, look, man, we like it, but it might be just a little too on the nose, and we might have to just bring it back a little bit. So let's play with that. And I was a little bit bummed, I got to be honest, but I was like, nah, no problem. I get it. I knew that it wasn't, it was going to be kind of a hard sell, But in that time, they had made some headway with casting, so they had narrowed it down to a few people. That's when they got Jason Lyles. By the time I got back, there it was, and we had his life cast. So I'm like, all right, even better. We can sort of just leave full-size maquette that we already had worked out. We know where we don't want to go at this point. We go in a different direction, and I can follow some of the other designs that Keith Thompson had done that were the more subtle ones. But I mean, to say subtle is pretty nuts if you think about it, because I mean, this stuff is still pretty out there and pretty awesome. A lot of the shapes were a little more soft. They were definitely more humanoid. I kept looking at the Nigel Booth sculptures of the original, and I really wanted to implement some of that stuff in, and I just kept kind of following certain lines and stuff like that, but also following Keith's artwork really closely as well. And we just kept kind of tweaking it and get it closer and closer. I tried to kind of squeeze in a couple winks too. Hellbound, because I love Hellraiser 2 so much, and I love that you get this tiny little glimpse into the backstory of the Chatterer when you see his original form is a child. So in my own little way, if you look at the Chatterer's ears in this new one, they're very childlike ears. And that's the only thing on his whole head, except these crazy teeth, that is real human, if you think about it. Like, there's no humanity in his whole head, but here are these little ears, and if you look at them, they're sort of soft and subtle and almost like baby-like, Because we didn't mold it like a makeup, we molded it more like a mask because it was going to have mechanical elements. We had to know that we had enough room in there, and it wasn't really blending off anywhere. Because we had in the design, we had that kind of hard line, we knew that we could go all the way to that hard line, and that would be the seam in the final suit. So the head would go on like a mask and meet up with the suit, and everything would just attach that way. So I don't think anything really had to glue down on Jason's face underneath there like a makeup. There were like a few weeks between the inception of all this stuff to them having to go on set in Serbia, and it was like unbelievable, even to a point where I was like, I don't know if they're going to be able to do this. Like, this is nuts. Half the crew was working day jobs somewhere else. So, it was just this crazy kind of free for all, like people were just going wild. And the amount of work they got done in such a short amount of time was kind of mind blowing, but we didn't have time for teeth and out of mouth dentures and all this stuff. According to stuff in the script early on, I don't know how much of it actually made it through to the movie, but there was a lot of like almost stunty kind of stuff. You don't want to mess around with hard dentures that are out of mouth with a lot of stunts, because you can really mess up a stuntman's teeth or something like that. We just decided to keep it all in the mask. So the teeth would come out, in the silicone, just like the rest of the mask, basically. Josh and Sierra went in after the fact and were able to get that return around the teeth to make them really look like they were actually shattering, like enamel teeth. You know what I mean? There was actually a mechanical version that there were elements that moved the teeth themselves. So I don't even think he was responsible for that. I think they would remote control that motor movement, and you actually got a chatter. And which I remember when the tests were being done and Josh was sending me like little videos and stuff, it was like violent. Nicholas Vince just controlling those teeth and getting a little chatter out of there is one thing. This was like a jackhammer. It was really interesting how it moved. They may have had versions on set that were different, that maybe Jason was able to control himself. Me and Jaremy were at work when it was coming out, and a couple people had seen it, like they had seen like kind of sneak previews or screenings of it, and we were listening to everybody on YouTube and all the good and bad, whatever we could find. We were just so excited to see the final project and hear what everyone had to say. It was really fun. But I'm glad I got to tell the ear story about the little children's ear. Oh, I was going to say, I hope he's happy with the new Chatterer and how that all looked. I just basically finished his head, and I was like, look, guys, I would love to be more involved, but I gotta bail because I was getting married at the time. So I didn't have the time to stick around, but I was, in touch with everybody that was working on it. And they were telling me, keeping me like on top of what's going on here and there. And then everyone was sending me pictures and stuff as the thing was going on. And I was so excited, but it was a bummer because I was like, man, I wish I could be there to finish off the character or jump on some of the bodies or even jump on one of the others at that time. And then by the time I, had gotten married and everything was sort of settling again, they were on their way to Serbia. And I was like, man, even that was like, oh man, that'd be so cool to go and see this all getting filmed. She was pumped too, even though she didn't see me much that whole time, because I was like at work all day. Then, at Josh and Sierra's, I was worried about driving and stuff like that. We were drinking so much coffee all day. After work, we were getting Bang energy drinks, which is like this like low sugar energy drink. We were delirious by like maybe 9:30 p.m. every night. Me, Jaremy, everybody there, we were so hopped up on caffeine. We were nuts. I'm surprised Josh could even handle us, because we had the Hellraiser movies playing on a loop. Every single one of them. I forget how many there are, like 10 or whatever. We would be cracking on everything and messing around with each other and just screaming and laughing and being ridiculous. And we had so much fun. And like the next day at work, we'd all be exhausted. And the whole time you have those moments like in the industry where you have to stop for a second and you're like, man, I can't believe I'm doing this right now. Like I'm over here sculpting with Jaremy Aiello, this is like Bicycle Girl, the Borg. Like this guy's done everything. You know, we're hopped up on energy drinks and coffee, and we're sculpting Cenobites in this awesome shop with our friends. You know, and it's like it's crazy. I mean, I thought it was amazing. I love the look of the whole thing. It like blew me away seeing all the stuff on camera, most especially the Pinhead character, because obviously there was all kinds of controversy and stuff like that. And how do you mess with Doug Bradley's legacy and all this other stuff? But I just thought that even though they changed so much, everything was so respectful that there's no way that you can watch it as a fan and not be at least pleased by what you got. And I thought Jamie did an amazing job, and Jason Lyles and everyone that played the Cenobites did an amazing job. I was really impressed with it. I was impressed with the directions they took the Leviathan like tech and the boxes and how they moved and stuff. It was cool. I mean, the whole time we were making these Cenobites, we were like coming up with like, what would you do? What would you do? What would you do? They had this cool like lookbook of all of Keith's designs, and they were all like laminated and stuff. I'm like flipping through, and I was like, oh man, this is great, and that's great, and this is crazy. I loved every single one of the Cenobites. I thought that like one after the other were cooler than the next, and I was so pumped about that. I mean, I'm a small part of this whole thing, but I really had a blast doing it, and I was just on cloud nine, like, you know, being involved at all, and then seeing it and actually being happy with the final product. You know, you're like, oh man, thank God. Like it doesn't happen very often, but you know, it's pretty cool. Thanks a lot, guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment.